Hey guys, it's Shubho and welcome to another Photoshop tutorial. Today we are going to learn about the camera raw filter. So without much further ado, let's begin. Remember, if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe, comment and share it with your friends. With that said, let's begin. So, this is a picture that I took in Digha and this is not one of my best images. Not because I don't particularly like this image, but because I have tilted it because I was in a hurry to get it. So I was like, and I clicked it and then I noticed the horizon lines all wrong. But we'll fix that later. For now, this is how you use the camera raw filter. I have used it in a number of videos before, but this is a particular tutorial on this. So hopefully you like it. Now, so if you have a JPEG image, this is how it will open. If, however, you have a raw image that you have taken from a DSLR, it will actually open with the camera raw filter. But since most of you won't be using RAWs, I'll just show you how to do it without the raw with JPEGs, because if you have a raw file, it will automatically open with the raw filter, so there's not much to it. So you're gonna go to filter and you have camera raw filter, the shortcut to which is Shift Control A, and you click this and this is how it comes out. Now let's collapse this menu. You have all these expandable menu bars. Now before Photoshop 2021, all these options or these menu bars were up over here side by side, and then you had a drop down menu for each. Now they have made it like all together. So it's basically the same, the functions remain the same, just they have been relocated. So that's that. Now with the actual editing. So here on the top you have the histogram and you have my camera setting at which I was shooting the photo. So you have ISO 100, it was shot with 18 to 105. And remember, because this is a raw file, all the information was embedded and is embedded inside the file. So you have the information like 18 to 105, the lens that I shot with. You actually have the information of what camera I shot with. You have f4 and you have 1 by 600 seconds. So 1/600th of a second was the shutter speed, because I was obviously compensating for the exposure, and I have no idea why I didn't shoot it with a f8 or something, because I was trying to go for the depth. But anyway, that's a mistake. If you're going for the depth like I did, you should shoot at a much lower aperture value like f8, where the aperture hole becomes really small. But as you can see, since this is a shot at 18 mm, as it's at 18 mm, it's very the wide and the depth is still there, because this lens actually goes down to f3.5. So this is pretty much wide open aperture and you still don't see much blur, and the reason for that is it's at 18 mm, it's full wide, and that's why there's no separation between the background and the foreground. That's a neat photography lessons. If you want some more, let me know down in the comment if you want me to do a dedicated photography tutorial. Now with this, you have the basic tab, so you open it and it says white balance is as shot. So for now, it's at the white balance that I shot it on. Okay, fine. So this is the temperature slider. You can make it very cool, like blue, and you can make it very warm, like yellow. But you can make subtle adjustments also. So I'm just gonna go to 0. Just go to 0. Why is this not working? Okay, no, that's not what I wanted. Control Shift A. What is happening? Okay, so it's now at 0. Now tint is the same. You can increase or you can make it look a bit greener, or you can make it a little bit on the magenta side, and it basically does the same thing. So, okay. Okay, so I found out why it was not going to 0. My num lock was not active and I was trying to press it on the keypad. So press it on the numpad. Things happen. Okay, so the next section of this, of the basic panel, is the exposure. So you have this slider. You can either make your image darker or brighter. So you want to keep it somewhere in the middle, like this. Now this is the histogram, and sorry I forgot to mention it. This actually shows you how well exposed your image is. So as you can see, most of the spikes is on the right side. Spikes are on the right side. So this basically means that most of the image is overexposed. Most of the pixels are overexposed. So I should have made it a little bit darker. But anyway, but we're going to keep exposure at 0 because we don't want to darken or brighten our entire image, because if we do that, this part of the image, his pants and his jeans, it will also get darker, and we don't want that. So we are going to leave it at here. We don't want to mess with the exposure as of now. Now the contrast slider is a bit interesting. Contrast actually adds light to the light areas and dark to the dark areas. It's like showering in the rain, but it does come handy at sometimes when you really want to accentuate the dark and the light areas. But the thing about contrast, as I said, it makes the bright areas brighter and the dark areas darker. Point is, it also adds saturation. So we are going to just zoom into these balloons. And as you can see, if I make it, the contrast -100, these looks very faded. But if I pull it up, you can see it's making the dark areas darker and the bright areas brighter. True, but it's also making these balloons very saturated. And you can say that for the umbrella. If you look at this umbrella, it's -100. It looks like this. You increase the contrast and it's suddenly more blue. So remember, if you're adding contrast, you're also adding saturation to an image. Now, we're going to keep it to 0 because we don't really want that. Keep the contrast to 0, zoom out. Then we have the highlights. So we've done exposure, we have done contrast, now you have the highlights. So the highlights, what you're going to do, what it does is it will take these pixels that are already very highlighted on the brighter side, and it's going to adjust these pixels. As you can see, the moment I move my mouse over here, it basically says, the moment I move my mouse over here, it basically says highlights. As you can see, you can move the contrast to 0. And you can say highlights, and highlights is 0 because I haven't done anything. So this is the highlights, and it says it's 0. It basically shows you on the histogram itself, the highlights is 0. So we're going to move the highlights. Let's say we're going to move it right over here, and we add some, we have some colors back in the sky. It's not completely blown out anymore. And you see highlights is now -55. And this is the exposure, this is the middle part, and this is the shadows. Okay, now we have the shadows. Shadows is this part, so it's towards the dark end but not the extreme dark end. So if we move the shadows up and down, as you can see, completely moving the shadows down is causing an extreme spike in the left section and is completely darkening these areas that are already dark. And if I move it up, you can see that there is detail on the shadows, but this also makes the image look very, very bad. It does not look natural at all, because in our daily life, as much as we hate this look because nothing is this contrasted, and it's true that nothing is actually this much contrasted, But we also have to remember that we see our world through contrast. We differentiate depth and everything else. We differentiate color, depth, the angle of light, everything by contrast. If it's darker and one side is brighter, we automatically assume that the way this light is coming from is not reaching that area, hence we have a sense of depth. And I'll show it to you. If I increase the contrast, you can see this area is completely dark and this area is light. So we can assume that this area is not flat because light is not hitting it the exact same way. This is applied in drawing, this is applied in sketching, this is applied in painting, this is applied in every form of visual art, be it 3D modeling, photography or videography. Light is an important thing and we make sense of light and the dimensions of the objects around us, objects and people around us, through how light is hitting them. So contrast is important. So we are not just going to bring out everything that there is in the shadows. We would leave it there. But let's say we move it up to here and we have a fairly good image without ruining the contrast and thereby making the image look cartoony. Okay? So then we have the whites. Now the whites at play with the bright pixels. Now, so the highlights play with the bright pixels. The shadows play with the dark pixels. And then we have the whites that also play with the dark white pixels or the bright pixels. So what's the difference between a white and a highlight? Well, the thing is, highlights will play or adjust the pixels that are towards the brighter side. Shadows will adjust pixels that are towards the darker side. But whites and the one under it, which is the blacks, will play with the absolute brightest and the whitest pixels of the image. So it's basically the tip of the iceberg or the creme de la creme, if you would call it. That's what the whites and blacks are playing with here. Let's see what the whites and blacks actually do. So if you move it here to the extreme left side of the histogram, we can see that the extreme left is being labeled as blacks. The moment we move back towards right a bit, it's called shadows, which is being adjusted to +5. This is exposure, which is also the midtones. This is highlights, which is basically towards the right side of the brighter pixels. This is whites towards extreme right of the brightest pixels. So shadows, darker pixels, white, black, darkest pixels, highlights, brighter pixels, and whites is brightest pixels. So we are going to bring the whites down on this because the sky is still overexposed. We are going to bring it down, and as you can see, we have some sky. Now, the blacks. The blacks do, as I said, it adjusts the extreme left. As you can see, if we move it to the left, we see there's a spike to the extreme left, and that shows that these. Okay, I did not do that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Control Z this. We move the whites black back, and we see some contrast here. Now the blacks. If we move the blacks, you see a very thin spike on the left side, and this is because these are the pixels that blacks affect, the extreme left or the darkest of the dark pixels. So that's there. Now we don't want this, so we're going to move it right up to here, and let's say we move it up to here. Don't want the spike. We don't want the spike on the white either, but Okay, so we've very much controlled it. Let's move the exposure down a tad bit and see how that helps. Yeah, so I think we have made it somewhere. Now, so the black, adjust the darkest pixels. As you can see, there's a spike on the extreme left. Okay, let's keep it here. The whites, maybe the extreme bright pixels, as you can see. This is where we see the spike when we move the whites up, not over here. So we're going to keep it down because we want some details. The highlights, as you can see, it's not the extreme, it's moving from here. So it's on the brightest side, but it's not the brightest. So we're going to keep it down because again we want some detail on the skies. And the contrast is basically adding more to whatever it is there. Keep it 0 because we don't want too much contrast. We have moved the exposure down a little so that it blends well with the environment. Now, let's move on to the next section, which is the texture, clarity, and dehaze. With this thing adds more texture, so you can see it becomes more clear and you can see the folds. If we zoom in, you can actually, okay, no, okay, yeah. No, yes, please fit into view. Okay, fit in view, yes. And zoom in, let's zoom in and let's see. If we zoom in, you can actually see the textures on this guy's shirt with the clarity on. If we move it back, it looks kind of smoky. It looks a dreamy kind of vibe. So if you're going for that, okay, fine. But we don't want to move the clarity to 100%, and the reason for this is this. Reason for that is this. Okay, clarity increases the contrast, but it does not increase the contrast as a whole. It increases the contrast on the edges. So everything looks very separate and very distinct from one another. It's like adding a black, when we were kids and we learned how to draw, they would basically add like a thick black border on stuff so that it can be easily framed or distinguished from the rest of the things in the big canvas. So that is what clarity does. It basically adds borders, it makes the contrast on the edges very high, and also it decreases saturation. So don't make it too high, play with this thing. Okay. So we move on to our next section, which is the texture section, and texture basically adds texture to these things, and I don't really want it at 100%. Let's keep it over here. That looks good, and you can see we have texture right over here. Yeah, we have it. Okay, fine. Now you have the clarity. Okay, as you can see, if I move it right over here, a few things happen. So what does clarity do? Clarity, what it does is it increases the contrast, not on the image as a whole, but on the edges of the image. And it also reduces saturation. And you're going to see the saturation part real soon. If I move the clarity over here, his shirt is a lot greener than if I do it like this. And you can see his folds of the shirts get exaggerated because it is exaggerating the contrast on the edges. That's how it works. It increases the contrast on the edges and it kind of takes away the saturation. And that's what clarity does. You don't want to overdo this. This makes your images look very cartoony, so I absolutely don't want to overdo this. Let's keep it over here so it's clear, but I don't want it too clear. Now dehaze, that's exactly what it does. This thing adds a very foggy look. So if you're going for muted colors, this might help. But I don't think you want to completely, plus 100. This looks nothing good. So I'm gonna keep it right over here. Now vibrance and saturation. Now this slider, vibrance, basically makes tells the software how pure or how, in a sense, bright the color is. So this is like totally blue. You don't want that. And let's keep it over here. And saturation is how saturated the color is, which is also you don't want it. Keep it over here. Okay. Now let's come to the curve. Now, as you know, the curves, I have already explained it in full detail, but in case you haven't seen this, so this is another remember, a reminder, a throwback, a revision, if you would call. So this is the highlight, this is the white, this is the midtone, this is the shadow, and this is the dark. And this basically does what I've told you. If you want to lift the blacks a bit, you can do it, and it adds a bit of fogginess to the image. And let's say I want to lift the shadows a tad bit. Maybe I want to move the highlights a little, or maybe, yeah, that's it. Let's keep it here. We don't want to do much of it. But this is a very powerful tool, and this thing is actually used to add contrast, and the way you do it is the classic S curve. You pull this thing over here, and you pull this thing down, and that creates an S curve which adds contrast. But we don't need that. We have done that. Don't need that. Don't need that. Just going to bring the shadows up a little bit with this. I think that will do. Maybe you want to decrease, and this curve has 3 channels. So you have the blue channel, the green channel, and the red channel. And all these colors have the opposite color. So you have cyan, which is the opposite of red, as you can see. You have green and magenta, which is green's opposite. You have blue, and you have yellow, which is opposite. Now we are not going to do anything much here, but this can be used in a very good way when you are split toning. If you want a video, the curves video is on YouTube. Please do check it out. Now, let's go to the detail part. Detail is the same thing. It adds sharpening and it reduces noise, but I don't think I have much noise, and color noise as well. So this image is perfectly exposed, there is no noise, so let's not dive into that. And this thing is showing a spike in the black. I'm going to move the black and let's see where I did wrong. Let's move this thing. Come on. Okay, no, let's leave it. We don't want that. And I think we should dial down the vibrance a little. Yeah, I think this looks much more natural. And we will also dumb down the clarity and the texture. Yes, this looks much more natural than what was there. Remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should. It should look natural, and it should look like that you are actually, trying to actually capture this image, not actually believable is the word I was looking for. Yes, it's actually believable, not something that you made and it looks like a clownish image. Even if you are manipulating photos, it should look believable. And then you have color mixture. Okay, so the detail adds adds sharpening, reduces noise and stuff like that. I already said that. And you have the color mixture. So the color mixture is a very interesting tool, and this camera filter module is the exact same as the Lightroom's develop module. So that's something. Now this particular tool or this particular segment of the camera filter is very important because this is what we mainly use for color grading also, although there is a different entire segment called color grading, but this is also used. So this takes individual colors and you can then change the color itself, which is you can adjust the hues. You can change how bright or dark the pixels are, which is luminance. And then you have saturation, which adjusts the saturation of the images. So let's say I want my blues, this is the blues, I want to make them more greener. You can see the blues are looking more greener, but I don't want that. 0. Let's say I want my yellows to look, I don't know, yellow or orangey, and you can see all the yellow in the rocks is getting orangey. If you like that look, okay, fine, I don't think. Or you can make it greener, that's it. You have your oranges, which can be yellower or oranger. Okay, I don't want that. Then you have your reds, which you can make this very beetroot color or more orangey color. I don't want that either. Keep it to 0. And then you have your aquas, which can be bluer or greener. So you just keep it at 0. You don't want that. Then you have your blues, which can be blue, greener or purpler. We don't want that. So purples can be bluer. Maybe this will help. Yes. So we'll make the purples actually bluer because blue is the theme here. And then we have the magentas, which can be more purple or magenta-ish. Okay. Now with that said, let's go to the saturation, because for this particular image, this is the image that this is the slider that we'll be working with along with the luminance slider. Now if you look over here, there is a particular tool, and if you hover your mouse, it says targeted adjustment tool. You click on this, and you click on this color, because you want it, and then just move it a tad bit. Okay, so why did I desaturate the balloons? The reason I desaturated the balloons is because the balloons are in an orangey reddish color and these colors attract attention. I did not want that attention to be going there because it's not the subject of my image. I want my subject to retain the attention. So that's why I did not do that. Okay, that's that. Let's say I want this particular color. I go to the luminance tab, grab this particular image and make it a little brighter. Okay, now the problem with this is, since this is the same blue as the sky, it's going to make the sky brighter as well. So let's just keep it. Okay, now let's increase the saturation of this thing, because let's keep it, yeah, this looks good. This also, because these colors are similar, this is also affecting the color of sky. Okay, let's grab this, make it redder, and you can see the balloons are getting redder. We don't want that, we can keep it here. Then you have the luminance, which basically makes it more bright. So let's add some saturation to the balloons. This looks just too dull. Yeah, let's keep them here. Okay, now we can make this brighter. No, we don't want that because that makes the balloons brighter. And this is a very tough decision. And if you really want to go in and you have to select all of these and you have to individually correct them, So that video is coming up soon, but for now we'll just do it like this. And so you have luminance, and you're trying to adjust the luminance. So you have aqua, it makes them bright or dark. So let's make them bright. Blues, let's keep them here. For magentas, it really doesn't affect much, but let's keep it here. And this thing doesn't. So basically, purples and magentas, since these are not the colors that are usually very much present in an environment, they don't really affect the outcome of 90% of images, at least to my experience. Okay, with that said, let's go to the color grading. Now, in color grading, you will have three wheels. Previously, this used to be the split toning, but now this is how you do split toning. So, in color grading, you can add colors to highlights or shadows. The same thing can be done with the curves as well. That has been covered in my curves tutorial. Please see it, link is in the description. Okay, now, so in this system, what you're going to do, you see midtones and you see shadows and you see highlights. So you can say I can add, let's say I want my shadows to be F1 and my highlights to be yellowish, and let's say I want that if I move it, it's taking more part in the shadows, and if I move it to the right side, the shadows are becoming like more brighter. So we don't want that. We want to keep it down to the extreme darkness. And with the highlights, again, we want them on the extreme highlights. And as you can see, this basically adds colors to both the highlights and the shadows, and then we can use this balance thing to suggest to the computer that we want the balance more to the highlight, that is, more of the area will be treated as highlights, thus there will be more yellow. And if, as you can see, with this thing turned off, only very particular areas which are bright enough are considered as highlights, and thus yellow is added, and almost the entire image looks blue. But if I move it on this side, you can see pretty much the opposite, where you see little to no blue and you see all yellows. So you can adjust this and make this color grade, but I don't want that, so I'm going to just keep it here, and alt click this color grading, and we have basically reset everything. And then you can have these individual wheels for shadows and midtones and highlights, and you can play with these, and what you basically end up doing is adding colors to the highlights, shadows and the midtones. And then you have a global. Now, global acts like a filter, so let's do that again. Let's move it here and let's move it here, and let's do this and keep it. If I go to global and I make it, let's say, purpley, this does not affect highlights, shadows or midtones in particular. This just puts a purple filter, if you would, on the entire image or the whatever adjustment. I don't know why you would do that, but that's what the global circle does. And then let me just alt click it and it's gone. Yay. So let's go to optics, and you have the lens information and everything. So for now, you can correct the distortion, I don't want that, or the vignette, and it's going to add a dark or a white vignette depending on which way you go. If you go -100, it's adding a dark vignette. If you add a +100, it's going to add a white vignette, and that's it. And you can add the fringe, and if you have a light coming in from the side and lens flare. You can correct them with these sliders. I don't have any of it. Just leave it, and that's it. Then you have geometry, and this is particularly interesting to me because this actually straightens the image, although I don't know how much it will straighten my image. Let's see, let's go auto, and it has roughly straightened it out. You can do this, and as you can see, a little bit of auto and a little bit of level correction, or level correction doesn't mean the Photoshop exposure levels, the level in the sense the horizon levels has done it. It has basically straightened my image. Then you have the effects panel, which can add green, right? And you can manipulate the size of the grain or the roughness of the grains. I don't want any grain, give it to 0. And then you have vignetting effect, and this is where you see it more properly. If you go -100, it adds a dark vignette. If you go to +100, that's a white vignette, and then you can, of course, be careful with it, and you have some other options such as midpoint, where you want your vignette to start blending in. So +100 is at the very edges, -100, and 0 is basically in the middle. And then you have the roundness of the vignette. So if I move it here, then you can see the roundness is not there. It's basically a frame, and then you can move it up, and it becomes a circle. And then you have a feather. Now this literally looks like a circular frame. And this doesn't. So yeah, that's there. And then with the dark vignette, you can also choose what the highlights are. So I don't know why you do this. This is just to show when you're actually applying a vignette, you're going to be very careful to apply a very tiny amount so that it doesn't look, again, unnatural. Okay, and then we have this slider called calibration. Technically, I don't use it this much, but this can be used to manipulate the hue and the saturation, and basically the temperature. Because if you see, you only have the RGB primaries, you don't have much colors in here, so you can just adjust the temperature, and you can go maybe make the hues a little bit different, or maybe make it a little bit orangish, and you can adjust the saturation, and you can actually color grade with this. But the color mixer and the color grading options are much better for color grading, although some people do use this very often to color grade their images. If you are that kind of a person, go ahead. It's basically the same thing. Now since we are done with this, let's go to the spot remover tool. So as you can see, okay, let's put this into the screen. Yes, now this is actually a very interesting tool. This is a kind of a brush, and it helps me remove spots or people from the image. So let's say I do this, and it will just take this part of the image and move it here. Okay, and as you can see, it's going to do this, it's going to move things, and that's how you do it. Okay, let's do it properly. So let's say I want to remove, okay, let's move these people, and let's move it from here, and you can see they have mostly been removed. And you can adjust the feather and the opacity. And opacity 1 is nothing that. There you have it. Or you can move this thing, and you can try with different kind of patches. But if you really want to do this, I would not suggest the the spot healing brush tool. Just do it. Let's reset this completely. Just do it in Photoshop. There are much better ways to do spot removal inside Photoshop tool panel, which is this panel rather than this. Then you have the brush tool, which actually lets you use this same brush and apply effects on areas. So let's say I want to, I don't know, make it a bit brighter, but I don't want the entire image to be brighter. I want a particular spot. Let's say I want this part of his pants to be a little brighter. So I'm going to paint it over, and you can see it's getting brighter. Okay, that's how you do it. But I don't think it looks very good, so just keep it like this. So that's that. Now you also have a gradient tool. Now this can be useful. So what the gradient tool does is it moves the exposure. So you can see the exposure is plus 1.85, and if I move it, you will probably be able to see, is this a red mask over here that basically tells you where the effect is. You can turn this off, but let me explain how this works, this graduated filter. It basically goes like this. So anywhere up to this green line, the effect is fully active, and anywhere after this red line, there is no effect. And this part in the middle is a transitional area. So that's that. I don't want it brighter, let's make it darker. Nah, I think I'll just do without this. Okay, let's keep it here. Or I could have just put this as a, what should I say, reset button. This is a reset button, and this is a radial filter which does the same thing. Let me try and brighten my subject up. I'm gonna move this thing right over here, drag it down, make it a little bit wider, move it up, move it down. And as you can see, this part suddenly looks a lot brighter, but we don't want it this bright. We want it this bright. Again, if we make it like, let's not. If we make it this bright, it looks very unnatural. If we make it this dark, it looks very unnatural. But we want it brighter, so we just add a tad bit of brightness on this area. Okay, so I'm gonna hit the escape key, and you can see he is a little brighter, all the while not being, very, very, very standout. We don't want him to look unnatural. That's the theme here. Nothing you want to do here that makes it look unnatural. Then you have the red eye, which is used for red eye correction. You also have an option for pet eye, but most normal today's cameras don't give that feature, and give that artifact rather, not a feature. It's a bug. It's not a feature, it's a bug. But anyway, mostly because we don't use flashes, or maybe we mouse flashes, so the red eye thing is not there anymore. But then you also have a pet eye feature, which is for your pet or animals. And then finally you have your presets. So if you have any presets, these are going to show up here. I don't have any. So let's say OK, and you have this image. Now, if you have any more corrections that you want to make, you can just hop back into Camera Raw Filter. You can use it. You can also use Camera Raw Filter as a smart object. Let me show you. You hit Ctrl J to duplicate the layer, and you hit Ctrl Shift A. Oh no, you first convert this to a smart object. So you go to smart object. Now it's a smart object. You can say it by the icon right over here. Let me wear my glasses. Sometimes it's difficult to keep the glasses on. This is Control Shift A, and let's go to the basic. And let's say I want a little less details on the shadows, a little more contrast. Yeah. Let's say I don't want this balloon to be so bright, or this color filter. I'm going to go to color mixture. I'm going to take this adjustment tool, place it here, a little bit darker. Again, just a little bit darker. You don't want to make them too dark or too bright. You don't want to make it look unnatural. I'm going to go to saturation, hit it again, a little bit. Okay. Saturation tab, click this right over here. Okay, and I think this will be okay. Now, the advantage of applying the camera raw filter as a smart object on a smart object as a smart filter, as you can see here, as opposed to directly on your raw images, is because if you click it, you can see all your settings right here. If this was not there, and if I just made a normal copy of it and it was not a smart object, I can make any changes to it and these things will not remain there. I'll show you. Hit OK, hit a copy of the background, hit Control J, and if I press Control Shift A, and if I increase the exposure, hit OK, and you can see it's very overexposed. And if I hit Control Shift A again, there's nothing there. Everything is zero, as if it never happened. So you can apply camera raw filter to a raw image. You can apply camera raw filter to a JPEG image. But whatever you do, my option or my advice will always be to first convert it into a smart object and then apply your filters. Do all the adjustments that I showed you. If you have any questions, please let me know. And play with the sliders as much as you want. But the reason you want to convert it into a smart object is because once you're done with it, the changes remain and you can go and re-edit them. Otherwise, you are in for a tough time. With that said, that will be it. Please remember to like, share and subscribe. Thanks a lot.